values just drive so much of the HR programs, right?
Yeah.
How we hire, how we manage performance, who we promote, who we let go, all of those things. But it's bigger than that, because where directionally we're heading as a business, as a company, you have to think about, are we bringing on the right people? Are we developing the people that are going to get us from point A to point B? Or are they just going to stay in point A?
This is the Organizational Health Advantage podcast with Keith Hadley and James Felton, principal consultants at Table Group. They're in the business of coaching leaders to build strategic focus and cultural alignment that leads to amazing results. Welcome to the Org Health Advantage.
Hello, and welcome back to the Org Health Advantage podcast. I'm your co-host, James Felton. I'm joined, not as always, but I love it when I am joined by my good friend and colleague and co-host, Keith Hadley. Keith, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, as almost always by Keith Hadley.
Yes.
Yes,
almost always.
Doing well. Thank you, James. And
I
Joyce
guess
is back.
since we're on video, everybody knows that Joyce is here too. Joyce Shaefer, our colleague at the Table Group, and also a good friend. And Joyce is from St. Louis.
Yeah.
Hi, Joyce.
Hello, everybody.
And Joyce has been on the show a couple of times, most recently with her colleague, with her client, Jason.
Yes, Jason Smith.
Yeah, that was great.
Yes, absolutely. So it's great to have you back on, Joyce.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And today we were talking about being a strategic HR executive, right?
Yes.
And Joyce, you have a lot of experience with this.
I do.
Because you worked at a high level in an HR capacity, but you had a different role before that. So why don't you give us a little bit of background real quick?
Okay. Well, my background is I actually started my career in accounting.
Yes.
And spent about 10 years, both in public accounting and corporate America, and then moved over into HR and then organizational development later. So very different career trajectory.
Yeah.
But
totally.
in my entry point was compensation. So accounting to HR made it easy through compensation. And then I spent about 13 years in HR and OD. And so learned a lot.
Did you love it right away? Like as soon as you got your hands into HR, you're like, oh, this is what I want to be doing.
I loved it when I was still an accountant, because one of my first accounting roles, I was supporting an HR group from an accounting standpoint. And I had no idea. When I went to college, I had no idea HR even existed.
Yeah.
Probably would have picked something like that or marketing if it wasn't for accounting. But, I went for the hard stuff where where you're going to make the most money right off the bat.
Well, it's funny because James and we both work with you a ton, and like you are a very strategic thinker. And so like if you had said like finance, like that makes total sense to me. Like, oh yeah, finance, but like accounting, I'm like, oh, I can't imagine Joyce as an accountant. No disrespect to our accountants out there, but it seems to draw from just a different personality type or skill set. I don't know. I probably dug myself into a hole.
No,
Joyce, you're a strategic thinker. Forward, big idea, forward thinking.
Well, what's funny though is when, think about when we're doing feedback exercises with executive teams and there's a CFO in the room who is, really more of an analyst and really a contributor on the executive team. And, you don't really understand that that's the only role they play on the team. They're very invested in the business. And the feedback is always, you don't seem like a typical accountant. And so the same thing I would say about accounting, I would say about HR.
Yeah.
I think there's probably two kinds of HR people, the strategic business partner type of person. And then there's the employee relations, employee advocate, just really wants to be there maybe in the tactical side of HR versus the business side.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to say it.
I like that's going to tee us up for the conversation we want to have. But I had one experience pretty early on at my time at Table Group where the HR leader in the room was that second type. And now I
Yes.
wish I could say she was doing it a very positive side, like, hey, I'm the culture carrier. I'm here to really be a champion of people. But what began to emerge with her in particular is that she was there as a protector of the people.
Yes. Yes.
And we began to see that who does she think she needs to protect people from? From her colleagues on the exec team.
Yes.
And it led to all kinds of weird dynamics. It was kind of if we had a little bit of like a Goofus and Gallant, like
yes.
That's like, okay, that's maybe the purest example of what we were trying to avoid, is that she would only speak up when she felt like she had to like correct the group or defend the employees from the group. And it became such a distraction.
Yeah. So they could either do that, or sometimes they put their personal preferences first. It's like, if I want to be liked, if I'm afraid of conflict, if this is how I operate, then I'm not going to speak up on the executive team. I'm just going to be a passive person that prioritizes my function, not the role of the executive team member that they should play.
Yeah. And so what do you think are the major bullet points of what to look for in a strategic HR leader? Somebody on the executive team. Go ahead.
Well, it's funny because now we have some of the language from Working Genius. And so I think about the strategic HR person probably has some wonder, invention, or discernment. They like to be at that higher altitude, thinking about the business, thinking about the clarity, thinking about the direction of the company, and then thinking about it functionally and saying, okay, now how do I bridge all of that big business stuff I need to worry about with the execution of my responsibility, which is where I think the galvanizing enablement tenacity comes into play.
Right. So you're saying, like, first and foremost, they need to be a leader of the organization as opposed to a leader of the function.
Completely. Completely.
Joyce, you shared a story with us that was kind of a formative conversation. I would love for you to tell that story.
Yes. Okay. So, because I was thinking, it was a story I'd never told you two before. And we've told so many stories about our careers along the way. So I had, I was in compensation, like I said, I managed an HR call center, and it finally gave me the credibility to move into an HR business leader role, supporting the business, being on the leadership team.
And now let's be clear, just in scope and size, like revenues, employees, what size organization is this? Is this like...
Okay, so the company overall at the time was probably about 5 or 6 billion at the time I was leading this division. The division was 3 billion.
Wow.
So it represented 50 to 60% of the company's global revenue. So it was the biggest division. It was the division that, always had to give a little bit more or do different things when other parts of the world were struggling. But anyway, so I had already become a nerd for Patrick Lencioni books and everything. And it was funny because I had an HR business leader job before, working with the scientific organization, but now I'm moving into the role of working with the sales and marketing group. So I said I went from a group that would ask for permission to a group that would ask for forgiveness. So even in a large company, you can have many different cultures. And this culture was highly competitive because it was a sales and marketing people. But anyway, so I walk in, I have my very first meeting with the leader of the division. And we were talking about my goals. It was day one on the job. And he said, the biggest thing I need you to accomplish is to create an HR strategy. And I was like, okay. And I just asked the very simple question, well, what's the business strategy? Because I need to align the HR strategy to the business strategy. And he just looked at me. He just stared, like didn't have anything to say. And I feel like I need to make a side point because this book, I'm holding it up, The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive, is actually the Fable version of The Advantage, which is the book that we use in our consulting. And the misdirected person in this book is actually the HR leader.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think that's kind of interesting too. But that book was so profound for me when I read it, because as an HR person, I was always thinking, we had an OD group, an L&D group that was creating HR programs that were really, really good, but they weren't, they just seemed like they were missing something.
Yeah.
And when I read the 4 Obsessions book, it seriously was like the Hallelujah choir went off, because it was like, oh, that's the stickiness factor. It's, you don't just create HR programs, which is discipline 4 in the book. You actually, build a team, create the clarity, over communicate it, and then you reinforce it through your HR systems.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the stickiness factor.
Right.
I know this isn't exactly the direction that we're going in the podcast, but how did he eventually answer that question that you asked him, which was such a good question?
Yeah.
What's the business strategy?
Yeah. So he looked at me, and the thing I loved about this leader was he was super humble. And so he said, you're right. We need we need a business strategy. And so, like, fast forward the next week, I've got my PowerPoint ready to go with the 4 disciplines of organizational health. And so this is week 1 on the job, and I'm presenting to my peers on the leadership team of what we need to do. And we need to start with the business strategy and all of this. And it happened to be that my welcome dinner was that evening. And so we're having dinner. And by the way, on this leadership team, there were like 6 ENTPs. And ENTPs are not the easiest. They just like to argue for the sake of arguing. I am an ENTP, so I can say that.
Nice.
And I presented this, and everybody just looked and was like, makes sense.
Yeah.
How do we do this? And so I was expecting arguments and got none.
Right. What a great open-minded team. You're only there for a week, and they're like, yeah, okay, we can do this.
Yes.
We just need to pause and just honor the fact that, like, the very first thing you did as the new HR leader was help the business craft its business strategy. It's like, oh my gosh, if we could bottle that up, if we could, literally anybody on that team could have and should have been able to do that. If you're on that team, you should be able to help the team craft its own strategy for running a business. But the fact that, like, that was your first move, and they're all like, oh yeah. I mean, I can only guess that, like, your relationship with everybody in the team was quite different after that.
Yeah. It was, because at that my welcome dinner, one of the guys that I found out later was one of the toughest people to, just the super smart, super committed to his way of doing things. That night he stood up and, made a toast and welcomed me and said, in 1 week, you have single-handedly saved HR. And I just thought, wow, all right, that's low pressure.
Yeah.
I just really think a lot of it is just the simple work that we now do on a daily basis, that at that point I started integrating and seeing what wasn't working and how to ask simple questions to get to where we needed to be.
Yeah. And the reality there is, it's like, how can I do my job if we don't have clarity on the direction? And then let's get to that. Like, and so many, obviously so many functions were okay just going along and, like, but not having that broader strategy. And so the reality for point number one, be a leader of the organization first, not just a functional leader. That's not just true of an HR executive. It's true about any of those functions. We ask all of those leaders to be that first.
Yeah. And I think it was obvious the leadership team was in silos.
Yes.
Because everybody was okay that there wasn't an overall strategy. They had their departmental strategy.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that's point number one. What's a second bullet point that you would point to as like, hey, strategic HR leaders need to be this?
So they've got to be a clarity champion. So again, we talked about HR strategy, business strategy, but it's bigger than just the business strategy. It's the core purpose, the core values, the culture overall, the direction of the company, what makes us unique, what are we trying to get accomplished? Even when you think about it from, obviously from a values standpoint, values just drives so much of the HR programs, right? How we hire, how we manage performance, who we promote, who we let go, all of those things. But it's bigger than that, because where directionally we're heading as a business, as a company, you have to think about, are we bringing on the right people? Are we developing the people that are going to get us from point A to point B? Or are they just going to stay in point A? And so it takes work to think about that, but you have to be focused on the clarity.
In my experience prior to Table Group, I was at Career Builder, and we made a huge strategic shift away from being a job board to actually being software as a service. And at the time, my role was working with like our enterprise sales leaders. And to your point, it was like the business strategy had shifted, and then the mandate was we need to take sales reps who sold advertising and turn them into sales reps who sell software. And the ones that we can't help get there, we need to find new ones who can. And it was a massive like learning and development lift.
Yes.
But it was 100% linked to a shift in the strategy. So, it wasn't training for the sake of training. It was training with a very specific purpose that matched the company purpose. And so, that's.
Yes. So it's like, when you think about it, if your company's growing and you're trying to go into a new direction and you're just an HR talent acquisition person, not thinking about the business strategy, you're going to just hire people, right? You're going to try and shorten your days to hire to get as many warm bodies in the seat. If you're thinking about the overall direction of the company, I think about it as you have to operate in double vision. You have to operate today with one eye on today, one eye on tomorrow, and make sure the decisions you're making today don't jeopardize the future. And so if you're a strategic leader, you're hiring people that are not just going to sit in the seat that you're hiring for, but that they have promotability and you can see them. It's almost like you're playing chess instead of checkers. That you're looking at the long-term strategic moves ahead.
I don't know that people think about that enough.
Yeah.
That idea of promotability. I think they, of course, think about like, will this person be successful in this role?
Yes.
I don't know how often they think about, will this person be so successful that they could get promoted?
Yes. I actually hired somebody early on. It was one of my very first people management roles. And I was taking a long time to hire this person. So I was hiring slowly, James. And people are like, are your expectations too high? And I said, no, I think we're trying to change this department. We've got to find the right people. So we interviewed somebody finally, and she after the interview, she left. And I said, I think I just hired my future boss. And everybody's like, what? And I go, this person could go to the top. And she is actually a CHRO right now.
That's awesome.
And so, it's like we have to be okay, but yes, we have to play that long-term game and think about the promotability of people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay.
All right.
So we have leader first over function first. We have clarity champion.
Yes.
What's a third bullet point that we need to cover?
They have to have a seat at the table. They have to be a strategic partner in decision making. And it probably goes a little bit with business leader first, but a really good HR person, you don't know that they're in the HR seat if you're observing the meeting. They're asking questions about the business. They may be thinking of it from an HR posture, like, who are we going to put in that leadership role or so on. But they have to think first and contribute to decision making as a member of the team. So if they don't understand that part of the business, they have a responsibility to learn that part of the business.
Yep. I had a conversation today with a leader who's not in HR who he was essentially saying, like, I only would bring in HR after I've made my big decisions just to help me execute the decisions I've made. And now he's not the CEO. He was, he's on, and I was really uncomfortable with that and kind of challenged that. I was like, well, wouldn't you want a partner at the table with you to help you make the right decision in the first place, or help shape the decision? I think part of it is that in his experience, like, he just hasn't had a strategic HR leader that's been, helping him think through things at that level.
Right.
And so he just sees HR as like, well, no, at some point this is just going to turn into a bunch of recs and we hire people, right?
I know. Right.
Yeah. And the opposite of what you're talking about, Joyce, is where we are in a meeting and we kind of see the HR leader, or it could be like tech or legal or something else, where they just check out with this like low participation, waiting to see if anything hits their department. And in this case, it would be like, oh, you need people? Oh, let me gauge.
Yes. Yes.
No, we need more from you than that.
Yeah. I told you my first HR leader job, I sat on a leadership team with me and 13 PhD scientists, molecular biologists, biochemists.
Whoa.
They spoke a different language.
Yes.
But, and I was never going to speak that language fluently, but I still had a responsibility to start to understand and respect their business. And so, we often say it's the person who understands things the least that could ask a poignant question, because they're not as emotionally involved. They're seeing things from what does or doesn't make sense. And so that's the responsibility, I think, of an HR person is to see that. Otherwise, it's hard to help the business leaders assess talent if you don't even understand the direction of the company or the content.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So that's number 3, a strategic partner in decision making.
Yes.
What's another bullet point that you have?
All right. I think this one is my second favorite after, business leader first, HR leader second. And it's often something that I see some business leaders, HR leaders excel at, and others that look at me like a deer in headlights when I tell them that's part of their responsibility, is they need to be a coach for the leadership team. The leadership team, I mean, there would be business leaders that I worked with that would come into my office and say, hey, I need to have a conversation with Steve or with Jim or whomever, and I just don't know how to go about it. Or, so they would come to me for advice, trusted partner. And then there were other times where I would have to go to the boss who was misbehaving somehow and give them feedback. Now, anybody should have been able to do that on the leadership team. But I think that HR has a special internal coach responsibility, because they're equipped with the leadership skills and the leadership materials to be able to help make that happen.
Yeah. I'm this one might be the one I might disagree with, and I think it's just more nuanced in that, like, I don't think that you kind of led into that too. I don't think the head of HR should be the sole person doing that stuff.
Oh,
And
right.
right. And I don't think that so sometimes there becomes that person who everybody looks to is like, well, you I'm not going to have that conversation with the leader, but you should.
Yeah.
I see it, but you go talk to the leader, and that's not fair to the HR leader. It's not fair for me to absolve myself of that responsibility. I also think if an HR leader is sitting in the meeting, like watching for poor behaviors, that it's like, well, you shouldn't be doing that either because you're a strategic leader. So all of that, I think, like it has its place. It shouldn't be paramount in this person's, and that's why it's lower on the list, probably.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I just think that so the reason I say some of them look at me with a deer in headlights is because if you have more of an enablement genius where you just want to support and you don't want to rock the boat and
right,
you want everyone to like you,
right,
that can be a really tough space to enter into, is to either coach or guide. And it doesn't just mean the leader, but it's coaching and guiding people to work things out, um,
right,
to have those conversations. But I think my point is that there is a level of responsibility they have because of the knowledge that they generally come to the table with.
So
yeah,
it's almost like since that's maybe some part of the HR leader's background or training, in the same way that maybe the IT person would end up being sort of the tech guy on the team. But
Yeah.
I'm maybe halfway between you, because I had a client once that the HR leader, who was very strategic, by the way, great leader, just said, "Oh, I see my job as I'm like the HR business partner for the exec team." I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, okay." It was like one of these. Wasn't sure what she meant by that, but what I saw happen is that she would have like her own separate meetings with the CEO to talk about the team, and it became a
yes,
little bit of like there's a team of 2 and a team of 6, and the team of 2
yes,
was like special consigliere to the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just trying to, Joyce, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because
Yeah.
yeah, it's like,
A-
what's the lines that we're not trying to cross, that we don't want to
Right.
cross, and what's the
Which
value
does,
that we're trying to add?
yes,
yeah,
it does kind of get into my next point, James, going down your list of they're really the architect of the leadership development, talent management strategies. And so if they're out there trying to connect HR strategy to business strategy, and that means there's talent management, leadership development, I think this is a responsibility, by the way, of every executive team member, but it's always scanning, always looking for the future successors of the business, always looking for your replacement,
hmm
all of that. I think that, again, that was just because they're running succession planning processes, they're running talent
hmm
management processes, that maybe becomes more innate to them, that that's part of their responsibility. And
yeah,
that's why I say they maybe are scanning more. I'm not saying they should scan more or less. I just think based on their responsibility, they may be looking for that talent more,
hmm
or
Yeah.
caring more about a good succession planning process or
hmm
things like that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's almost like we need them to be team first,
Mhm.
executive
sure,
first, strategic partner first. But then at the end of the day, it's like, let's recognize they are the, you know, people resources HR professional on the team, and so
Yeah.
they need to lean into that
Yes.
functional expertise.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
But we should never abdicate,
Yeah.
right,
right? Like executive teams, we say that all the time. Executive teams should never abdicate the stewardship, the executive sponsorship of culture, of clarity, of succession planning. I mean, HR's the architect of the bridge of how to make it happen, right? Operationally. But executives should never let that go.
Yeah. So, do you want to go down those bullet points one more time?
Sure, but I have one.
Or do you want me to? Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I cut you off. Sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. So there's so much turmoil in the world, right? There's acquisitions, there's sales, there's all this kind of stuff. There's constant crisis management, change management, and so on. And again, because of the knowledge they bring, they're bringing in, when to onboard people into the new culture through acquisition, but they're really helping through crisis management and change management on the team from that cultural standpoint.
Yeah.
Totally.
So those are the big ones.
Yeah.
What are they again?
All right. Business leader first, HR leader second.
Yep.
Clarity champion, strategic partner in decision making / seat at the table, coach for the leadership team, or a bridge of that somehow, architect of leadership development, talent management strategies, and then the change and crisis management leader.
That's awesome. That's a good list, Joyce.
That's a good list.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
Awesome.
welcome.
All right. Well, and with that, I say we thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to be with you guys.
Oh, it's awesome.
Even when we don't 100% agree, it's even more fun.
Maybe like 95% agree. 95%. But no, it's great having you. And with that, we thank you all for joining and listening or watching, and we look forward to our next opportunity to serve you. And with that, thanks for joining the Org Health Advantage podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Org Health Advantage. Your hosts, Keith and James, are helping leaders change the world of work and invite you to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. For more resources on building stronger teams and organizational health, check out tablegroup.com.